1 Kings chapter number 11, and we'll start in the first verse. But King Solomon loved many strange women, together with the daughter of Pharaoh, the women of the Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Zidonians, and Hittites. Of the nations concerning which the Lord said unto the children of Israel, Ye shall not go into them, neither shall they come in unto you. For surely they will turn away your heart after their gods. Solomon clave unto these in love. He had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. For it came to pass when Solomon was old that his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not perfect with the Lord his God, as was the heart of David his father. For Solomon went after Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Zidonians, and after Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. And Solomon did evil in the sight of the Lord, and went not fully after the Lord, as did David his father. Then Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, in the hill that is before Jerusalem, and for Molech, the abomination of the children of Ammon. And likewise did he for all his strange wives, which burnt incense and sacrificed unto their gods. And the Lord was angry with Solomon, because his heart was turned from the Lord God of Israel, which had appeared unto him twice. And he had commanded him concerning this thing, that he should not go after other gods. But he kept not that which the Lord commanded. Wherefore the Lord said unto Solomon, For as much as this is done of thee, and thou hast not kept my covenant, my statutes, which I have commanded thee, I will surely rend the kingdom from thee, and will give it to thy servant. Notwithstanding, in thy days I will not do it for David thy father's sake, but I will rend it out of the hand of thy son. Howbeit I will not rend away all the kingdom, but I will give one tribe to thy son for David my servant's sake, and for Jerusalem's sake, which I have chosen. And the Lord stirred up an adversary unto Solomon. And we'll stop there. Solomon was blessed with wealth and wisdom and power. God had spoken to him twice, direct revelation. He was worldwide famous for his wisdom and power. And then, as the story usually goes, it all came crashing down for Solomon. One of the saddest things you read in the Bible is when you get to verse number 4, when Solomon was old, his wives turned away his heart after other gods. He lived that whole life in service to God and faithfulness to God, and when he was old, it all fell apart for him. Solomon did not love the wife of his youth, but he added wife upon wife. He didn't learn the lessons of his father's sin and his mother's sin, the consequences of sexual sin, but he continued down that path of wickedness. And you see a generational problem here, a generational issue that Solomon didn't learn from the mistakes of his parents, but he went a lot farther than they did. 700 wives, 300 concubines. And these heathen women turned his heart after other gods. His heart was not perfect with the Lord. His heart was not with God. And they turned him even to worshiping the wicked gods of Chemosh and Molech, the valley of Hinnom, where the fires burned there, and that's where they worshipped these false gods, and that's where they did a human sacrifice. And Solomon had gone so far into sin that his legacy ended up worshiping these wicked abominations and introducing these gods into the people of Israel. God was taking the kingdom from him. And he tells him that because of David's sake, he wasn't going to take it from him, but his son. And then for David's sake also, he wasn't going to take all the tribes away, and he was going to leave Judah with the throne there in Jerusalem with David's lineage. But Solomon's legacy is that his sin and the consequences were going to split the kingdom. Solomon starts having problems with foreign nations, as we read in verse 14, that the Lord stirred up an adversary unto Solomon. and the blessings of Solomon's kingdom had ceased. That the enemies that God had, see, it wasn't Solomon's power that kept the enemies at bay, but it was God's blessing. And the enemies got stirred up because God in His sovereignty allowed them to get stirred up. He stirred them up as a consequence and a punishment and retribution for Solomon's sin. So at this point, Solomon is down on the downward slide in his spiritual walk. The kingdom is now facing outer threats that it hadn't had in a long time. And in walks Jeroboam. Jeroboam is the next player we find in the story of Israel, and he has a major part in the plot and the story of Israel. Jeroboam was the son of a widow servant of Solomon. And in verse 27 of 1 Kings 11, it says, "And this was the cause that he lifted up his hand against the king. Solomon built Milo and repaired the breaches of the city, his father David." So verse 27, you find the start of what would be the rending and the breaking up of the kingdom of Israel. Solomon had some building projects going on, and he looked out among the workers, and there was this one worker who was an industrious man. He was a brave and valiant warrior, and his name was Jeroboam. And Jeroboam saw that he was a good worker, a hard worker. He was a valiant young man, mighty man of valor. He was industrious, so he promotes him and gives him a promotion and puts him in charge of the house of Joseph. So he was a man that could get things done, a man that people would work for, a man that he could get people to listen to what he had to say. So Solomon sees this in Jeroboam and says, "This is the kind of guy I want working for me. This is the kind of guy that can get things done. I'm going to promote him." Hard worker, brave, overcoming a hard childhood. Didn't grow up in a blessed family with mother and father, but the son of a widow servant. And here he is rising up in the ranks because he was a hard worker, valiant. He did all the right things. Well, Jeroboam was out of town one day, and Ahijah, the prophet, came and found him. And he grabbed a hold of him by his brand new clothes, and he ripped his brand new clothes into 12 pieces. And I'm sure the prophet got his attention by doing that. But I'm equally sure that he forgave him after he heard what the prophet had to say to him. In verse 31, he said to Jeroboam, "Take the 10 pieces." So he ripped his clothes into 12 pieces. And he said, "Take 10 pieces. For thus saith the Lord, the God of Israel, Behold, I will rend the kingdom out of the hand of Solomon, and will give thee the 10 tribes to thee. But he shall have one tribe for my servant David's sake, and for Jerusalem's sake, the city which I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel." So Jeroboam may have thought, well, you could have told me that without ripping my clothes apart. But anyway, he takes those 10 pieces, and he's not thinking about his clothes anymore. He's thinking, I'm going to have a king. I'm going to be a king. I'm going to have a kingdom. He went from the son of a widow's servant to now the prophet tells him he's going to have 10 tribes and rule them. Well, not surprisingly, it didn't sit too well with Solomon. So Solomon tries to assassinate Jeroboam. And does that remind you of another scenario that we just studied a couple weeks ago, of another king who finds out about another man that is prophesied to take the throne? Saul found out about David. And instead of Saul repenting of his sins, what does Saul do? Saul tries to kill David. Well, Solomon finds out about Jeroboam. And instead of Solomon repenting of his sins, he tries to kill Jeroboam. Well, Jeroboam goes and hides himself until Solomon died, and his son Rehoboam reigned in his stead. Well, things didn't sit real well for things didn't end well for Solomon, and this has set the tone for the nation. Instead of leaving the nation strong, he left it intact with a powder keg. So sadly, that's how Solomon dies. It was a sad event, a sad way for him to die. But he didn't pass off the kingdom in as good hands as he received it. but he passed it off still intact, but a powder keg, just ready to blow. Well, he passes the kingdom off to his son Rehoboam, and it didn't take very long for the problems to start for the new king. The people immediately went to King Rehoboam with a complaint. So in chapter 12, verse 4 and 5, they went to him and said, "Thy father made our yoke grievous. Now therefore, make thou the grievous service of thy father, and his heavy yoke which he put upon us lighter, and we will serve thee." And he said unto them, "Depart yet for 3 days, and then come again to me." And the people departed. Well, the people were tired of paying high taxes. Solomon's wealth, it seems, came at a high price. Solomon was wise. He was well beloved. He was famous. He brought a great deal of prosperity and peace and notoriety to the kingdom. And he had been king for 40 years. You know, that's hard for us to imagine in our government here in the United States, where our president, he can be president for 8 years, and then, if he gets elected the second time, year 6, you're already talking about, well, who's going to be the next one? Well, he was king for 40 years. You don't get elected king, so that's a long time. Most of the people in the kingdom, that's all they'd ever known or could remember was King Solomon. That was it. And so, like his policies or not, like his taxes that he levied or not, that's just the world that they lived in. Well, Solomon's son came on the scene, and you have the people that slaved away for Solomon because they loved him for a very long time. They loved Solomon. Solomon said, "This is what we're going to do." They said, "You know what? The Lord is with Solomon. The Lord has spoken to Solomon. Look at this temple that he's built. Look at the palace that he built. We're with Solomon." Well, his son comes along, and now the people say, "You know what? We work for Solomon, but this is not going to continue on forever. Something's got to give. We're tired of paying all these taxes. We're tired of these continual building projects." Because if you flip back in chapter number 19, verse number 9, chapter number 9 and verse 15. Sorry about that. "And this is the reason of the levy which King Solomon raised. For to build the house of the Lord, and his own house, and Milo, and the wall of Jerusalem, and Hazor, and Megiddo, and Gezer." So, one of the reasons for the levy was these building projects. His own house and Milo. So that one area there is significant in particular. Solomon had to raise the taxes to build. And the magnificent home that he built, if you remember last time, it took all those years to build. He built, along with other things, as public works that people were being taxed for them. So, not to mention, they were also paying for his wives and all of his gods. So here's Solomon with a house, a mighty house. We've got 700 wives and 300 concubines, and you can imagine if he was working for Solomon and paying high taxes, and you look over to Solomon's got all these wives, and they got to eat something, and his house is all made of gold. You can understand the people after a while saying, "You know what, maybe this isn't such a good idea, and maybe I'm a little tired of doing this." Well, not to mention they were paying for all this, and so that's something significant to think about. Also, Jeroboam became prominent because he was the industrial man in the building of the Milo, or the moat, the fence around Jerusalem. We read that back in chapter number 11. That's where Solomon saw him. So Solomon was raised the levy to build Milo, this moat, or a thing of defense around the breaches of the city of David. So this is where he came to fame. Jeroboam did. Then the taxes for the project is what the people brought. What brought the people against his son. So that's interesting. That this one little moat, or this defense system that was the center of all this. The thing that was being built by Solomon to defend Jerusalem could defend it against its enemies, but it couldn't defend it against sin. And this very defense system to protect the city from outside forces could not protect from the inward forces of sin. That this defense, this moat that there was building, brought Jeroboam up, which we'll see is not the greatest thing that could have happened. It's also what brought the people against Solomon or Rehoboam. So that's an interesting little building project, and it was the catalyst for what's about to happen, for the rise of Jeroboam and the eventual divide of the kingdom. So now what's going to happen? The people rise up and say, we worked for your dad, Rehoboam. We just lower the taxes. We worked hard for your dad, but we finished the projects. He had all these building projects, and we did it. We built them. We accomplished what we set out to do. We built the temple. We built the palace. We built the defenses. We fortified the city. The taxes don't still need to be so high. And that's one thing about any kind of politician. Once the taxes are up, you're never going to get them lowered back down. There's always something else. And so they said, we want to lower the taxes. They don't need to be so high. Lower the taxes, and we'll serve you just like we did Solomon. Well, the old men of Solomon's cabinet comes to Rehoboam and said, that you better listen to the people, make them happy, and they'll serve you forever. Just give them this request. Listen to the people, because you're not beloved like David, and you're not beloved like Solomon. You're just walking into this, and you've got these people who have been serving Solomon for 40 years. Use wisdom. So what did he do? Naturally, you would think that Rehoboam said, well, I better listen to my counselors. They've been helping my dad for all these years. They know a little bit about it. Well, of course, that's not what happened. The young man rejected that and went and found some young men. He went and found some people, his peers, who didn't have the experience in governing the kingdom. But he went and found people who would tell him what he wanted to hear. Rehoboam heard the counsel of the elders. He heard the counsel of Solomon's counselors. And they said, listen to the people, squelch the rebellion, lower the taxes, and they'll love you forever and get off on the right foot. But what did the young men tell him? The young men said, don't you listen to them. He said, don't let them push you around. You have to be tough. You have to throw your weight around. You have to tell them who's the boss. I was talking to a friend of mine in West Virginia. He's a coal miner, and he said that a young man just graduated school and never been in a coal mine before, and he went and because he graduated school and did all this stuff, he was the foreman of this coal mine. And he was down there, and he was the boss over people who had been coal mining for 30 or 40 years. And here's a 25-year-old, the boss of them. And he came and just was yelling and screaming and came down and said, I'm the boss, you got to listen to me. Well, they all just stopped working for him and said, if you have to tell us you're the boss, you're not really the boss. And they wouldn't work for him. And finally, somebody came over to him and said, these people have been doing this for a long time, and you need to use a little bit of wisdom when you come in here. And even though you are the boss, you need to use a little bit of wisdom. Well, Rehoboam didn't do that. He said, you want to complain about taxes? Well, I'll not only not lower your taxes, but I'm going to raise them. And I'm going to be more of a king and more of a man than Solomon ever thought about being. He said, Daddy used whips to get you to work, but I'm going to chase you with scorpions. So not only did he not use wisdom, and not only did he not come with them with a loving and compassionate heart, but he went and started trying to throw his weight around a little bit. And he was so full of pride and so in a self-aggrandizing state of mind, it's almost remarkable. Except we know that's how some people in power actually act. That instead of listening to people, or he just came and said, I'm in charge, you're going to do what I say or else. Just totally clueless and totally tone deaf of what was going on without the slightest bit of humility or compassion towards the people. Well, Saul began his reign, if we remember, by winning campaigns against the enemy of Israel. So Saul wasn't the best king. He wasn't a very good king at all, but he did win some battles. And he started off kind of rough, and he started off the people not really wanting to follow him, but he went and won some battles. And after he won some battles, the people of Israel said, you know what, let's follow him. He's the king. He's winning the battle. He's proven himself. Well then, if you remember when David took the throne after Saul died, it was 7 years before David could unite Israel. And remember I mentioned that David used some wisdom there while he was when he made Jerusalem the capital city, and he used some wisdom there to win back the other tribes. And it took him several years, but finally he united the kingdom. It wasn't just a piece of cake for David. Even after after the men of Judah made him king, there was still that potential for civil war, and it took wisdom and a little bit of time and patience before David was able to keep it all together. So Saul started kind of rocky in the midst of the fire. David started rocky in the midst of the fire. Solomon prayed for wisdom and began his reign enacting justice and judgment. So remember, as soon as Solomon became king, he went and started putting people to death and was righting wrongs that David had left over from his reign. So he started off setting things right. There was problems in the kingdom, and Solomon said, I'm just a child, or I feel like I'm a child. Lord, give me wisdom so I can do justice and judgment for the good of your people. And he went and started setting things right. So his started off bloody as well. So they all started in situations where they had to prove themselves, and after a period of time, they began to win the trust of the people. Rehoboam, on the other hand, was proud and arrogant. He came into the kingdom with the money and power, and everything was going kind of all right. He wanted the respect and the honor of David and the respect and honor of Solomon just because he was Rehoboam. He wanted honor and respect and everything else just because of who he was, and he didn't earn it, and he didn't come with it with any type of humility. He was faced with a challenge at the start of his reign as well, but unlike the three previous kings, Rehoboam failed. So here you have people screaming out, you gotta listen to us. You gotta listen to us. And he said, I'm not going to listen to you at all. I'm not going to listen to you. Not only am I not going to do what you say, I'm going to do the opposite. And if you don't like it, tough. You have to, because I'm the king. Well, this kind of reminds me of our government right now, where politicians won't listen to the people that put them in power. I know this is a kingship, and Rehoboam inherited the throne, but at the same time, he wouldn't listen to what the people were telling him. And you've got our government won't listen on both sides of it. They won't listen to what the people are going to say. And you can only push people so far for so long. It's not right to rebel, obviously, but what happens when sinful people are pushed and pushed and pushed, it's only a matter of time before something's got to give. And that's where you're at in Israel right now. They were pushed and they were pushed. Rehoboam pushed back, and he pushed back way too hard, too fast. And in chapter 12, in verse 16, it says this, So when all Israel saw that the king hearkened not unto them, the people answered the king, saying, What portion have we in David? Neither have we inheritance in the son of Jesse. To your tents, O Israel, now to see thy own house, David. So Israel departed into their tents. Now look at verse number 19. So Israel rebelled against the house of David unto this day. And it came to pass, when all Israel heard that Jeroboam was come again, that they sent and called him into the congregation and made him king over all Israel. There was none that followed the house of David, but the tribe of Judah only. So the people said to your tents, Israel, we're done with this. Judah's only looking out for themselves, and they can have it. And so the 10 tribes got together and they followed after Jeroboam. So they elected a man that could get things done, a valiant man, a man that could lead people. Remember all the things that Solomon saw in Jeroboam? Well, that's what the people saw in Jeroboam too. So they said, we'll make Jeroboam the king. He'll listen to us. We can work for him. We worked with Jeroboam when he was building the moat around Jerusalem. He's the kind of guy that can lead us. He's the kind of people that will listen to us. Jeroboam might have been the first Tea Party candidate. He was low taxes. He was a war hero. He was for the old style principles. He listened to the people. Elect Jeroboam and he'll take the country back. It's the kind of thing that they were talking about, and that's what they did. Jeroboam was a man of valor, just like David. And he was what the people were looking for in a leader. And if you didn't know the story, you would think that Jeroboam was the next hero in line of the heroes of Israel. That he would be the next story that you would tell in Sunday school. Look at Jeroboam. Look where he rose from. Look how God put him in charge. But there's a big difference between David and King Jeroboam. And that's David loved God and Jeroboam didn't. David was a man of valor and so was Jeroboam. David was loved by the people and was a hero and so was Jeroboam. David was a man of faith and loved God with all of his heart. Jeroboam was an opportunist who cared more about his own power than he did about God. Jeroboam came on the scene for his industriousness and his leadership. And there's two ways you can lead. You can do the right thing, and sometimes people will love you and sometimes not, like David. Or you can say the right things and you say the right things that the people want to hear. You can find out what people want and give it to them. And you can find out where people are going and you can jump in front of them. And that's kind of the way Jeroboam led. He said what the people wanted to hear. He looked where the people were going. And he jumped out in front of them and said, "Follow me." That was Jeroboam. He was an opportunist. They were very similar in another way. And from this point on, in the story of Israel, David and Jeroboam are standard bearers. So from here on out in the story of Israel, anytime a king does good, God compares him to David. And they say he was after his father David. And David is a standard bearer for good kings. Jeroboam, on the other hand, is the standard bearer for wicked kings. And anytime you find wicked kings, or not anytime, most times, whenever somebody wants to compare him to a bad king, they'll say he followed his father Jeroboam. So King David is a standard bearer for good. Jeroboam is a standard bearer for evil. Both were standards, one of godliness and faith, the other one of wickedness and idolatry. Jeroboam is an example of a horrid leader. David led his people to God, and Jeroboam led his people to the devil. He's a good example of where a false spiritual leader can take a people, and it's a good example to see how quickly one man can bring ruin to a people. So from here on out in the Bible, you'll read of Judah and you'll read of Israel. Israel would be the 10 tribes, and Judah would be, of course, the tribe of Judah. So the nation has split, and it stays split. That you have two kings from here on out. And that's when, it takes a little bit of study and thinking when you read throughout the rest of the history of Israel, because you have to keep it straight. Are they talking about Israel, or are they talking about Judah? Which kingdom are we talking about? Because now there's two kingdoms. From this point on forever, through the Old Testament, you have two kingdoms. You have the kingdom of Judah and the kingdom of Israel. One kingdom will continue on. One kingdom comes to an end. One kingdom sees its final days. So we have this split. And it all because of what Solomon did. Isn't that sad that David had this kingdom and all these promises? Solomon, that looked like was going to be even better than David. And then Solomon's sin brought about this great split that you have here. And not only that, but it seems like, you can see how God uses just seemingly small things to cause big problems. It was just that little building project that rose Jeroboam up to fame and he leads the children of Israel off to false god worship. He brought back golden calf worship. He brought back, he led the people away from going to Jerusalem to worship. he defiled the people and brought in false gods and led them off in a terrible way. And it all started from this one little thing there, that building project. And all these small little things. Rehoboam, if Rehoboam had used wisdom and just listened to the people, this wouldn't have happened. This was all a part of God's sovereign plan. It was all a part of God's redemptive plan to bring in the true king, the king of kings, the king of peace. But this is important. This is one of the big important things in the history of Israel, to this split that now it's looking real bad because God promised David an eternal throne, and now the kingdom splits. Now there's two kingdoms. The kingdom is divided. The one kingdom God had given with the borders and the land and the promises, now it's divided. You've got two kingdoms, two kings, two lineages. So it even further points the people to look to that one king who can restore and bring peace. Well, we'll close there for this evening, and we'll close in a word of prayer.